thank you again for doing this. And for anyone that has no idea who you are, which is going to be few and far between, I'm sure, would you mind giving us like a brief introduction?
Sure. So I'm 1/6 of Pro Coach, which is a UK-based, primarily competition prep coaching service, but we do offer transformation, non-competitive type services as well, and it's something we're going to expand a little bit more intensely on the kind of 2023 period of time for the team expanding in that area. But I was one part of formerly the Muscle Mentors previously that a lot of people kind of originally knew us from. And then I think that's actually when I originally spoke to you, I think, when we were going to build our subscription website. I remember emailing you, and I think you were super busy. But we basically ran an education type company back then, and then the team kind of branched out and specialized in different areas in the long run. And our bread and butter and our passion primarily was just coaching, and specifically coaching within that kind of physique realm, from an athlete perspective. And it's quite an interesting conversation to have it in this realm, but that concept of niche and that concept of being known for something very specific and doing something very specific and only focusing on that, we kind of got to the crossroads of are we educators or are we coaches? And they're both quite different when you get to the kind of the nth degree of it, in terms of you're really taking it all the way. So we just basically, we split in that regard, and we focus on that coaching side, and we've been running that since I launched Pro Coach. It was in lockdown about a year ago.
Okay.
It's not actually been going for that long. It's coming up to a year now, because we launched it in just after the new year. And then we've just gone from strength to strength this year. And it's been a really productive year. There's been a lot of travel, a lot of travel across the world for client shows, but that's been another side of things that I've kind of fully gone in terms of supporting those journeys and trying to be there as much as possible. And it's a big investment from a time perspective on my side and a financial perspective, because we're having to pay to go across the world. But that's been another kind of valuable thing that we've taken away from this year, in terms of getting out there and meeting more people and networking. And but we work with clients across the world. There's myself and then 5 coaches on the team, and we're going to expand to myself and 7 coaches from January. So there's 2 more coming on board, which will be great. And I primarily work with competitive athletes. The majority of them are I'm lucky enough to have as IFBB pros now. So the majority are on that kind of professional level, or they're just top level amateurs that are trying to kind of get to that next step. Sure. So it's all really exciting at the moment, and it's just a continued expansion, really. Just one thing we have done is, I guess, something that's quite different, and it's something that's actually quite interesting, because I know that you know Ben really well with the coach consultancy. Something that we've never really done in the past is like pushed external growth. It's all just been organic for the last handful of years, and we're now getting to a point where it's like we've got to think like a business now, not just coach and focus on being good coaches. So that's an interesting part of our journey, but that's a little bit about us.
Yeah. So how did you, when you're like building up your coaching business from the get-go, how did you kind of overcome those different learnings in business? Like, because you're going from coach, you've grown into a certain period, then is it a difficult transition for you now to go from Cal the coach into Cal the business person who needs to grow the business?
I think like a natural part of that was, I've coached to a point where, it's, and I think everyone's going to get here to an extent at some point in their career, but I've coached to a point of unsustainability in terms of how many people I take on and the workload that I've got. And I think I'm a firm believer in having to, you have to spend a little bit of time at the upper limit of that threshold to kind of know where it is. And then at that point, when I'm operating at that level, I know that I can't place focus on everything else, in terms of like the business probably suffers a little bit in terms of the logistics of the management of the team, and what's happening internally there, and me looking after the guys. And that's something that's been a bit of a lesson, especially within the Muscle Mentors. And now when we've come and launched Pro Coach and everything moving forwards, I've tried to strike a much clearer balance between the two. Coaching less, but refining the people that I am coaching. And then, a large part of the majority of the responsibility for me now within the business is just growing the coaching team and getting clients on board for the actual coaches within the team as well. So onboarding new clientele into the division of the coaches. And that's a big part of what we're doing with Ben. And that's a big part of what the focus has been for the last 6 months, because I can't coach forever, and there's got to be some form of longevity in terms of the business plan, and that kind of residual side of the guys thriving and me bringing on board new coaches. And the more successful they become, the more the brand grows, and that's a big focus now for us as well.
What do you think you did different in the beginning that made you so successful in comparison to people that have done it just as long, but perhaps are still where they were 3 years ago?
I think the relationship that you build with your audience is a big thing. I spent quite a long time doing it myself to an extent, in terms of like going through that journey myself, showing myself the concept of like walking the walk. And I think that probably forged a certain level of authority within the audience that was following me. And I've also been within quite influential circles in the career that I've had over the last 10 years. Like I spent some time at M10 with Mark Coles. I spent a lot of time with Jordan Peters in Manchester, and we trained together, and we had that little circle up there. So I've been around people that I've viewed as like my role models, and the people that I'd aspired to be when I was younger, 5-10 years ago in the industry. And that was like the pedestal of like, this is the top and this is where you're trying to get to. And I think the more time you spend there, the more time it starts to become attainable in terms of what you feel as though you can accomplish and achieve. And you obviously learn a lot in those environments as well. So I guess, putting yourself in growth environments where it probably is a little bit uncomfortable at the start because you feel like you're out of your own depth. That kind of forces you to change and forces you to get better very, very quickly. And then I think one thing that we've done that the social media side has been a massive part of the business growth, no doubt about it, but it's never really been something that I've done. It's never really been something that I've put too much emphasis on besides just documenting the journey. So like, apart from like just posting about my own journey with bodybuilding in the past, or apart from posting and documenting the client journey and being open and kind of, mapping out what those individuals are going through. And I think people kind of resonate with a lot of stuff you start to post in that regard, and it starts to build up a little bit more traction in terms of people, right, I'm in the same position as that. What are they doing? What kind of methodologies are they doing? And seeing the progress starts to build more authority and respect. And your words hold a little bit more weight once you've done that for a period of time. You get more results as a result of it. And then it's just backed up with just, something we try and preach within the team is just a relentless work ethic, but putting your efforts and your hard work in the right places and making sure your energy is going in the right places, instead of like, there's, I've been there before where you feel as though you're working hard and you're doing these long hours, but when you start to burn out, you don't really end up accomplishing anything. It's just like mindless work. Whereas we're a little bit more task orientated now, until in terms of where we put our emphasis. But I guess if I was to summarize like the difference there, it would be obviously the time that you put into it in terms of mastering your craft and the education behind that, learning from people, going on further education. We did a lot into mechanics. We did a lot into the body as a whole, anatomy and nutrition, and learning from people that had done that at a higher level than us.
It sounds like you're very intentional with your networking as well. So it sounds like you kind of seeked out people who were in those positions that you wanted to go and learn from. Yeah,
like that's a big part of it. I think one thing I've always done is, I've always had those role models or people that I'd looked up to in terms of like, that's the next level of what this discipline is, what this level of expertise is. And I've tried to spend time in those circles, because you take so much away from it. Sure. And I think, there is a certain level of humility in terms of accepting the fact that you're not you're not a fully refined version of yourself at the start, and the first kind of 10 years of your coaching career, and even after that now, like there's always more that you can learn, and you're never always right.
Sure.
And that's something that say again.
That's quite humble, like quite a humble attitude to have.
Yeah, but I think that's where you grow the most, because like I've even been in situations where, I can start to see certain aspects of myself coaching where I'll start to miss things because I feel as though I know the deal with that. I know the framework. I don't need to pay too much close attention to that. But then there'll be something that creeps up where I'll track back and go, I should have spotted that a little bit earlier, or it's something I've overviewed there. I've misread. And that's just like a little bit of complacency in terms of you've done this so many times, it almost becomes, it almost becomes subconscious. But I think just having the viewpoint of, always feeling as though you can get better, and always feeling as though you can learn, and always challenging what you're doing is a massive part of that, especially for when you're prepping people and coaching people. Like there's two sides of that. There's keeping an athlete safe, and then there's obviously taking an athlete to an accelerated level of progress. And I think both of those go hand in hand in terms of always being in a position where you can still add strings to your bow and refine your process.
Have you seen or noticed a shift over the years that you've been doing it between the way that people are it appears on social that people are more transitioning to like a safer use model in prepping their clients? Is that something that you've noticed over the last few years?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, massively. Massively. There's been a few kind of corner heads in the industry that have preached that level of teaching, and it's become popularized. And I think the biggest thing in the turning point is everyone in this industry is very receptive to success. So whatever the person's doing that's winning, whatever the person's doing that has been successful in the limelight of social media, and it's being projected on that platform because everyone's viewing it and consuming it, they'll start to really look into it and see value from it once they see it become successful. So I think at the start it was just that concept was something that these evidence-based coaches were doing, but then once more and more people were succeeding with that methodology, then people started to cotton on to it. And I think the last kind of 12 months or so, especially with some pretty influential people in the industry, now they've started to speak about it, and they're all singing from the same hymn sheet, but a little bit of a different hymn sheet that was away from that kind of old school dogmatic approach to coaching and how you're prepping people and how you're going, you're allowing people to go through that process. It's becoming a little bit more mainstream now, and that's ultimately the route forward. That's the direction it needs to go. But yeah, this year in particular has been a big shift in terms of what I've seen for sure, which is good.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's refreshing to hear. And so when you're going with your clients to actual competitions, just why do you do that? I don't know many other coaches that put that level of effort into making sure their clients are doing at that level. So what is it about you? Why did you decide, right, I need to be there, I need to go, I need to do all this traveling? What motivates you to do that?
I always feel there's definitely a greater level of understanding in terms of the peaking process in general at the back end of that prep. There's always going to be a great level of understanding and a greater grasp of the situation when you can see that in person, and you can see that multiple times across the day in person. So, we've all gone and traveled to Maidenhead to see a Two Bros regional, which is just down the road. You can get there in 90 minutes from where we're living now. So, a year ago it would have been just popping down the road because I didn't really have any international clients back then, a couple of years ago. Whereas now there's so many people competing on that international stage, whether it's in the US or whether it's in Europe. Part of that service is the fact that you can attend those shows in person and peak them in person, because the athlete's going to be under a lot less stress if you're there in person and not having to second guess everything they're doing, because you can talk them through the process in person, you can see them in person. But also, a lot of these shows, I'll have 3 or 4 clients that are doing the same show, whether it's in the same class or different classes. So, say for example, we went to the States for about 5 weeks, and we had 3 back-to-back shows in the States. And one of those shows, there's five or six athletes competing in the same pro show.
Right.
So you can kind of, if you plan your calendar well, you can kind of make more effective use of your time. But I just think there's a slightly greater level of success rate in terms of hitting the mark when you're there in person, you're peaking them in person, and also you're continuing to solidify that coach-client relationship in terms of the trust and the bond that you're creating. And I think that from a future success perspective, when you have that level of trust and you have that level of connection with a client and an athlete, it's very, very powerful in terms of what they're capable of doing.
Sure. And do you think that doing that as well and going along kind of ties in with what you were talking about social media, where it's kind of you're then able to more show the journey that your clients are going through and build that authenticity and trust through your social media with everyone?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't know many people. There are obviously several colleagues of mine that we're always at the same shows, and people from across the world, whether it's from the UK or Europe or America, and you start to get familiar with the same faces. But it's not a big handful of people that are doing that on a consistent basis, because it is quite a hectic schedule in terms of committing to that and staying in control of everything else in terms of all the other clients that are checking in at all times in different time zones, etc. But sure. I think we've tried to differentiate ourselves a little bit in terms of going that extra mile, and from a competitive success perspective, like across the board within the team, like we've got a substantial, from quite a big gap. Like the most pro cards within the UK, we're probably the most successful coaching team in the UK this year across all platforms, and that's going to come from like just going the extra mile in terms of putting the extra effort into those individuals. And that when a client sees you go to a show and you've traveled halfway across the world to get there, like there's not an expectation on them, but they're always going to have that thought process in the back of their mind of, if he's willing to do that for me, what am I willing to do in return to show him that that's my part of the process, and that's something I'm in control of, and I'm going to fully maximize that. And I can see that really evidently. Even clients that I've gone to watch and peak in person that haven't won their show, they've come top 3, whatever it might be. And when they move into that next phase and they go into their off season, the level of commitment and discipline you're going to see from that individual, because you built that connection, is like second to none, because they're then flawless, because they're just as bought in. Like both parties are significantly bought into that process, and it becomes a really powerful tool.
That's an incredible way to kind of build that trust and relationship with your clients. And you find that from a business perspective, that surely must help you with like client retention as well, the amount of time people are with you.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the interesting thing with the clientele that I work with now is when you start getting to that high level of competitive success, like we're flying out to the Olympia tomorrow. Like when you're with these guys, the pedestal that you refer success to is such a fine margin. Like whether it's winning a pro show or winning a pro card, it's quite an interesting when you actually take a step back. And I never really think about this stuff unless I'm on like a podcast. But when you take a step back and you look at that it's something I did a post on the other day on Instagram where, a couple of years ago, I would have defined success from a coaching perspective as like just getting a client within that top 5, or like getting a client in a first call out. And now you get to a point where when you win a little bit more in those environments, that level of success and that concept of success just refines itself over and over again until you're at a point where like you're going to these shows to just win, and then even second be considered a failure. And that's quite a high pressure situation to be in, and it's quite a the margin for success is so small. But I also think when you start getting to that level and finances come into play, and it's literally these individuals, it's their career, they're a professional athlete, that's all they do for a living for the most part. There's prize money in consideration, there's sponsorship money in consideration. That level of expectation just gets more and more refined, and from our side the pressure's on both parties in that regard, which is quite an interesting concept. But the more committed we can be to that process, I think the higher the percentage of kind of hitting your mark and succeeding in that regard.
And having those goals evolve to the point now where you're focused on that, getting that win for your client, is that what gives you drive and motivation to continue to go? Like, where does your passion come from for it?
Yeah, like obviously I'm a big fan and a lover of bodybuilding as a sport, and it's not something I pursue as the athlete anymore. I did that for a good 5-6 years, and ticked the competitive box, but I was kind of met with a little bit of a crossroads in my mind of the further I pushed the further I pushed the envelope of being the athlete, the more time and resources in my head I kind of felt I missed in terms of coaching. And you're at a crossroads where, and there's no denying the fact you can balance them both, because many people do, but I'm a very, very all or nothing person. So I can't have a 50% split or a 60-40% split. I've just got to be all in at one thing, and then the other thing just exists. And I kind of ticked that business / coaching box, 3 or 4 years ago. And the big thing, I think the big thing for me is, like, once I made that commitment, it was all eggs in one basket kind of thing.
Do you think
what are you going to say?
Sorry, do you think the habits and things that you have taught yourself throughout bodybuilding, so being committed, having the routine, having the schedule, focusing on an outcome, and then driving and doing everything you can to achieve that goal, do you think then when you flip that switch for business and coaching, that all of those habits and skills that you've developed in bodybuilding then come into play with your coaching as well?
Yeah, 100%, because that competitive nature is something that will link into the direction of the business as well, because we're all in this to. The big thing for me is I do it for a passion of bodybuilding, and I do it for a passion of, like, winning as well, because the more you win, the more you want to win, right? It's just like if your business is thriving and last month you turned over X, then you don't want to turn over any less than that next month. You want to either match it or turn over more in an ideal world. And it's the same thing when it comes to season in terms of how many pro cards you've got, how many clients have won, how many clients have made that top 3. Or even within the coaching team, how many clients have gone through a transformation process, how many clients have gone through a photo shoot prep, and we're always setting that pedestal higher and higher and higher. So I think you're taking both out of that, but I think the discipline you have as an athlete in the early days, for me, the kind of the fundamentals you applied to your own bodybuilding and the fundamentals you applied to getting your clients over the finish line in a successful manner, just applied directly hand in hand with business. It's just the only thing with the business side of things is I don't know. I'm not an expert in that realm. So, like, when it comes to financial management and being smart with taxes and tax efficiency, or being smart with the management of the business, or being smart with new business ideas, or going down into different avenues we can monetize and doing this and doing that, that's where an individual like Ben comes in, where he can kind of give me the direction, and then I'll just put in the man hours to get there. But it's just like, if a client comes on board, you've got a gifted individual that comes on board. They need the plan, and then they'll do the work to get there. It's the same kind of concept. Whereas I'm quite unrefined in terms of my. It's a little bit better now, but it's still not fantastic. I'm quite unrefined in terms of my like business savvy head. But the more time I spend and listen to people like Ben, like, the better it gets, and then I can just get guidance that way. And the fuel that's getting you into that end place is just, it's the same as you would have used for any other thing you're doing in your life. It's just, commitment, discipline, and just not being afraid of putting the time needed to get where you need to get.
Yeah. What do you think have been, like, some of the biggest difficulties in that curve of learning in business for you? Is there anything that stands out where you think, like, that was difficult to go through or difficult to understand, like, in business?
Well, one of the biggest things for me, in, like, over the last 5 years or so, was closing down the muscle mentors and going in that different direction, because that was at a point where I guess you'd say, like, we reached critical mass in terms of the direction it was going in, trying to balance all the things we were doing. And then you're at a point where it's like, you continue to do this, but in the back of your mind that it probably isn't growing at the rate you could grow if you focused on one thing. And that decision of going in a different direction and restarting the team, obviously three of the boys came with me, but we kind of restarted from scratch under a new brand and kind of organically grew from there. The thing that I used to struggle with was, like, the management of people within a team, because most of the people that were working with us were close friends of mine as well, because you developed a relationship over several years. So kind of going between putting your businessman hat on and putting your boss hat on is quite a difficult concept to do. So there always needs to be an understanding of, and I think it helps that everyone within the team now is pulling in the right direction, and we both kind of have we all have the same values, which helps massively. And I've tried to, learning from potential lessons in the past, I've tried to put an emphasis, especially within the team, in terms of like retaining the coaches I have. I've tried to put an emphasis on making, like, what would I want if I worked for a coaching establishment 10 years ago? What would I want in that relationship in terms of, percentage of income relative to what the client's paying, what added value am I getting, what freedom am I getting in terms of what I can say and how I can operate and being my own individual. I've tried to put that into a forefront focus when we're actually building the team out. So those individuals never really feel as though they need to leave, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to be in a position where I know in the back of my mind they're being a little bit hard done by in terms of what the business is taking from them relative to the work they're putting in. Like, I want to be in a position where they could be happy spending the next 15 years in the brand and thriving and, getting to the income they want to get to and building the life they want to live. And I think just the ability to learn how to do that in the right manner, being the boss and the friend, is quite a hard concept to grasp over time, but you just get better at it.
I think that's one of the most difficult challenges for pretty much every business owner that I've spoken to, is finding the right people to come on board, because you want people, like you just said, people that are invested into your business, that feel like they're getting something out of it, so that all of you can ultimately grow together. And finding good people seems to be the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Like, one thing we've done is everyone that's worked within the business, or all my coaches now, again, the emphasis is on, like, I never want to refer to them as employees, because they're not. Like, they're just, everyone's coaching on the same level. Everyone's just as skilled as everyone else. And, if I've got a client that comes on board, then, one thing that we were struggling with in the past was, especially when we started up the Pro Coach brand, I didn't want the brand to signify anything specific to me. I didn't want it to be my name. I didn't want it to be like me as an entity, because then you're creating an immediate barrier for people inquiring that say, I just want to get coached by Cal, and I don't really care who these other individuals are. I just want Cal. And that's something that when you're expanding the coaching team, you want to get to a point where that individual client is applying to be coached by the brand as opposed to by the individual, because then the breakdown of referral is not an issue anymore. We've tried really hard to break down those potential limitations to referral and make sure that everyone's viewed as, being on the same level, because we are, instead of like, oh, here's a cheaper coach on the team who you could do if you can't afford me, kind of thing. And that unison is a massive part of that, I think, with the team as a whole.
Yeah, and I think it's so important for anyone who's looking to grow or scale their business to not make it about them, and to make it about a team or a brand that has core beliefs as a group of coaches together that your clients can really get behind, and they're buying into the brand instead of buying into like just one of you as an individual.
Yeah, for sure.
So this has been super helpful, and I'm so grateful, as I said, Cal, for you coming on. I've just got one more question for you, which is, if tomorrow you woke up and social media was gone, there was all your accounts just disappeared, nothing left, what would you do tomorrow to, like, you wake up and you see that, what would be the first thing you do to get back on your feet?
Like, this is quite interesting. So, like, I know someone that lost their Instagram account this week, and I think he had like 70,000 followers, and he's had to start from scratch.
The other day.
Yeah. It's a difficult concept, because you gravitate a lot of your opportunity to that app. And once it's gone, it's like, that network and that relationship of those X amount of thousand individuals is gone to an extent. I think the biggest thing there is as a coach and as a person, nothing's changed, and the relationships that you've got with all your clients and the people that truly valued you has not changed. If I look at, I think I've got like 60 something thousand Instagram followers. I know if I do a post, a good post is probably going to get like 2,000 likes. So I know that 58,000 followers on Instagram probably aren't even, maybe 50,000 followers probably aren't even seeing my content, or they're not going to be individuals that are going to have like high levels of value towards the business, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I think it's just restarting from where you left off and just continue on the path you have. Obviously, the network you build with your colleagues in the industry, that can be something that you can, you know, if someone reached out to me that had lost their Instagram account and they said, look, mate, I need a little bit of a hand. Do you mind sharing this? Of course, I'm going to share, because if I was in the same situation, I'd want to do the same, right? So you can leverage your network to an extent, but I just think the biggest thing is like, even if those platforms went, and it's always a possibility, like we don't know what's going to come tomorrow, but even if those platforms went, the value that you can add as an individual, as a coach, has not changed. And it's just something that, you know, I remember when Matt Jensen lost his Instagram account a couple of years ago, didn't he? And it was like, I remember he was on like 100 and something thousand, and now he's on like 180,000 like 3 years later. So it just shows that just continuing on that path and keeping your network strong is going to bring you back into the position you are. And you've just got to remember, it's not losing a social media account is not losing your identity or losing your ability to coach and your skill set. It's just a front that the wider network seeing that can just be restarted if you need to, if you do lose it.
Sure. I think that's such good advice. To networking, I think, is huge. Do you have anything else that you have in place? Like, do you have lead magnets or capturing people's emails or anything like that?
Yeah. So thanks to Ben. We do have he runs that stuff. We do have what is quite a lengthy email list now, which is obviously something that we could use when needed. And that's always a big tool in terms of having that there. And we're relaunching the website next year to kind of expand upon that in terms of getting more people like into the framework of the brand that's not just on Instagram. So trying to create a little bit of a hub outside of just the social media platform. And that's something that, again, that's another lesson where it's like a couple of years ago, I would never even have the concept of the value of that.
Sure.
But the more you kind of learn, the more you put your business head on as opposed to just your coaching head, you start to understand the importance of it, and you realize that you do need to put some energy and resources into that, because it's something that will pay back long run, especially if something were to, you know, go wrong. For example, with the forefront of the face of the business, you've got that you know, infrastructure in the back end to guide you into that next step.
For sure. And where can people find out more about you, Cal?
So we're just, if you type in Pro Coach onto social media platforms, you'll see us on Instagram, and then www.teamprocoach.com will be the website that will launch early in the new year, which will house the other bits and bobs there in terms of client interface and any inquiries and you know, expansion on there in terms of we're going to launch a bit of a hub for the athletes and clients we have now that will give a little bit of added value along the coaching process. So there's some exciting things to come next year. But yeah, if it's just social media platforms, if you put in Pro Coach, you'll see there's me and 5 other coaches at the moment. There's a business page which is just team_Pro Coach, and anything you need can be found through those avenues.
Wicked. We'll put the links in the description as well for everyone. Cal, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.